My name is Brad Kemp from Schoology, Senior Instructional Designer here. And today's session is my bread and butter. It's what I live and die for. It's all about design. We're going to be taking some open materials and building them in Schoology. We're going to see all the nuts and bolts. And to make things interesting, I have Ann Cameron here from Sauk Rapids-Rice in Minnesota, great instructional designer. So we can have a little banter, a little back and forth here about, well, why are we making the decisions we're making? And we also have my friend and colleague, Kelly Adey here, who will be monitoring the chat the whole time and helping get some questions to us. And being your all voice in the webinar as well, because we have a lot of experts in on this call. And momentarily, what's very exciting here is that the open course we're going to be using, it's a humanities course. We are having the original course designer join us as well, who is from, she is faculty at Portland Community College, as well as works with a lot of other groups as well. So we have a nice mix of higher education, K-12, and more. So it's going to be a really fun, exciting session. We're going to be doing it again at 4 o'clock. Okay, you can, if you are in the Twitterverse, you can share what you learn here as well. Just so we can get things started, you all should see a questions panel in the GoToWebinar area. Those questions go directly to myself and Kelly, and we will be able to filter them and get them into the session. Okay, so just let's make sure we all know where that is. Let me know that you are hearing us, and you can hear that right now I'm nursing a cold. I would say 50% of the Schoology office right now is nursing a cold. The detriment of an open workspace. Great, thank you, Richard. I was considering putting a poll in here today with the weather going up and down. How many of you also have colds? So don't take it personally if I mute myself and cough up a lung today. I think we'll be okay. And as luck should have it, we are having a fire drill at Schoology office. So we're broadcasting live from Brooklyn, from my home today, to add a little twist. Kyle, I'm really glad no colds in Colorado. This is good. I think, Kelly, you can attest to that. No colds in Colorado.
Nope. Totally healthy here. That's right.
Nice. Great. Okay, so to get us started, what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to move some things off of my screen. And I'm going to put some links in the chat window for you, so you can all get up close to the materials we're using today. So you should see that coming in your chat area. This is a Google Drive folder. Hold on, let me send that to the whole audience here. And this is a public folder. If you do not have a Google account, you should still be able to access this material. These are the raw course materials we are using. All right. And to get us started here, and I'm going to also share this mind map. And if you all can confirm that you can see my screen, that would be great. You should see a big old mind map here. Susan, by the way, glad to hear you're homesick from school, but are still attending Schoology Leap. That's what I like to see. Dedication. Okay, so interestingly enough, I'm seeing some people say they see my screen, some people they don't. That's usually all or nothing. So let me just refresh here. 1 second. Okay, I just refreshed my screen. Let me know if everything is up. Yes, now I see a lot of positives. Great. So, Anne, um, as I mentioned, we have another panelist who's just having some GoToWebinar woes, who should be getting in here momentarily. Kelly, just let me know when she's in, and we'll pause and make sure everyone has her. And oh, I should see her now. Angela just logged in, so her audio should be connected in a second. So what was really enjoyable about this process of taking open courseware and putting it into Schoology is that it's what a lot of you are working on, a lot of your teachers are working on. When you do this, you're often using your own curriculum. Maybe it's not open courseware, maybe it's curriculum you already have. And it's those first steps is, well, what do I do? How do I get this into Schoology? I've taken Schoology training, I've done all this, but still, when faced with the daunting task of taking some pre-existing brick and mortar face-to-face training, sorry, not even training, education, lessons, curriculum, putting it into Schoology, well, what are the decisions we make? Is there a right and wrong way to do things? What goes in, what goes out? How do we keep things up to date? A lot of questions. We usually have both system administrators and lead teachers and instructors on this webinar, so I hope this is going to be helpful for everyone to get an eye into this. And when we first got into this and looked at this course here, and we saw these course modules, course resources, you know, it's tempting to go in here and just go into module 1, look at the activities, and just go straight forward. How would you advise teachers at your school that you work with to do this? Are we gonna jump in?
No, actually, I would take a good broad look at it first, and I actually like to start the design process on paper. So looking at the course as a whole, and of course taking a look at course objectives, what is it that I want the students to be able to know and do by the end of the course? And I like to have the teachers take a look at the content and chunk it out, similar to the way it is chunked out in our Google Drive folder as well. But one of the very first decisions we have to make is what type of course or presentation are we actually going to design? And that, of course, is it a flipped class? Is it fully online? Is it blended? And that's one of the very first decisions that we're going to make.
Right, so this idea of, interesting my mind map here, this idea of analysis, thinking about audience and delivery. And I should say that this mind map here is what Anne and I put together as we were chit-chatting, preparing for this. So, well, what are our first steps? And that analysis part is so important. Well, is this blended? How much am I trying to use Schoology in the classroom? Does everyone have laptops? Do they have devices? Do they have devices at home? If I make digital materials, will they be able to do them at home? Or is that something that needs to be done in the computer lab? Excuse me. Sometimes that has to do with demographics as well. All sorts of things go into that, which I think is such an important piece. So looks like we broke this down in a few places in analysis. As you said, Anne, is it fully online, virtual, or blended? And then this idea, I really like that this was part of the analysis as well. What can be personalized? Angie, welcome.
Yay.
Glad you got past our GoToWebinar woes.
Thank you.
I already did a soft introduction for you, Angie. Welcome. And I'll just let you introduce yourself. I introduced you as the designer of this course, but you wear a lot of hats with a lot of organizations, actually.
Can everybody hear me?
Absolutely.
Awesome, wonderful. Sorry, I'm using a corporate computer and I have a mic. I do web chats with my students, and then Citrix didn't wasn't compatible apparently this morning, so I'm on a different computer.
Yeah.
So my name is Angela Lohr. I did design the course. I do a little bit of adjunct work with one of our state colleges, but I'm actually, my primary role is I'm a lead faculty for 2 departments, philosophy and humanities at Colorado Technical University. So I manage about 25 to 30 faculty, depending on the term, and I do a lot with course design and assessment work and kind of anything that needs doing. So I had the opportunity to speak with Brad a few days ago, and I'm really excited about what you all are doing with these courses. You know, open education is really the thing we ought to be doing, and anytime I have the opportunity to collaborate with other people and get some great inspiration, and we can share ideas, it's a good day. So thank you. I really appreciate being here this morning, even though it's quite early on the West Coast.
Yes, and we appreciate it as well. And I'll put a question in chat here. Who all is using OpenCourseWare officially? A lot of you are actually part of the Open Ed movement that is organized federally. It's just such an interesting movement. I'd love to hear more about that if any of you have something to say about it. So we were just talking about not resisting that urge to dive in headfirst into the material and just start building. That this analysis part is really important. Of course, how something is going to be delivered, but also thinking about what can be personalized as well right out of the gate, so that personalization isn't just sort of an afterthought, but it's really part of the planning. And I think that can be done on a lot of levels here. Let's quickly break this down a little bit before we get into actually building things, because as at Schoology, we always talk about personalized learning and empowering that, and the biggest way to impact student achievement is to treat students as individuals, not as a clump. There's that great Sirkin Robinson TED Talk where he asks, well, those of you who have 2 children in the audience, are they exactly the same, or are they pretty much polar opposites? Okay, well, if the 2 children are polar opposites, how do we expect 30 students, whether they're adult learners or young learners, to be identical within the classroom that have no relationship? It's just one of those great things, and which is a great reason to have it in the forefront of the design process. So I'm going to go back to sticking with my dedication to not talking too much. I think I've already used up my quota of words. So Anne, walk me through some of the ideas we talked about earlier this week. And Angela, after Anne goes through this, I'd love to hear your reflections on this as well as course designer.
Well, Brad, you're right. Personalization is a key, and the ability, one of the great things about Schoology is that it gives you so many tools that allow you to differentiate and personalize each and every learning activity and experience. So one of the first things that I consider is students' prior or students' comfort level with technology. I want to be very, very careful not to use technology just for the sake of using technology. I want to make sure that it helps and enhances student engagement. It aids in their mastery of the concepts, and so it's got to be worth it. So also comfort level with the subject area. Humanities is a vast, broad subject. We do have diverse demographics, but that too is a big consideration. And one of the tools that I use, or one of the things that I always do, is I give all learners or all students in the class a technology survey right from the very beginning, and that gives me an idea of what types of device experiences do they have? What types of technology tools are they comfortable with and have they used before? And what is their motivation level or comfort level with trying new technology? So although I plan my course ahead of time, I'm very flexible so that, I use that agile design throughout as I receive and try things with students and receive their feedback and heed that. Also looking at ability levels. So primarily in this particular course, reading level was of utmost importance because my plan would be to differentiate all of the reading materials, meet students at their level, and then bring everyone forward and adjust accordingly as I go through. And then, of course, objective feedback as we go through based upon the scores and the feedback that we receive.
And you have, I think, what is a, I hope no one kills me for saying this, but what is a luxury about K-12 education is that there is a lot of data available to teachers on students' reading levels and their test scores that give actual some very concrete data on their abilities in different areas to drive that differentiation. But sometimes when I hear, well, let's take a lot of different reading levels into effect, there is a sense of this overwhelming flood to a teacher thinking, wait, do I need to make 5 different curriculums now? Wait, and what's interesting, I've even seen threads in this public school educators group of, hey, I'm teaching this. Does anyone have an idea of something that might be on the same reading level? So I think community is important. That's overwhelming if you're doing it yourself. But also to Angela's point, the idea of open course where assumes the idea of community and community support. And you also mentioned to me this site, Rewordify, which I was not previously familiar with, which was also interesting, the idea of using the same material but modifying it for different reading levels. And I assume that is different reading levels overall, but that can also come in be really handy for English language learners.
Right, and there's a number of other tools, things like Newsela and sites like Elm4U, where you can actually take learners' Lexile scores, and so you can find articles, and especially in the case of humanities, one that I was looking at was Elm4U, and that's a great site to be able to pull articles related to all areas of humanities, and you can differentiate then by, of course, Lexile. So using those individually assigned course materials in Schoology is a great way to do that.
Cool. Other people using those, or we'll see in the question area, anyone using other sites to help differentiate? Put that in chat. When it comes to differentiation, Angela, is there, I often hear from, I'm just going to give you a scenario and see if you can expand on it. I also often hear from my colleagues who are professors, especially teaching students who are incoming or teaching certain electives, that because students are coming from such totally different majors, they also might come with a completely different set of previous knowledge. For instance, you might have a music theory course in college that's open, but it could be a mix of music majors and anyone else. What are there other places you're thinking about differentiating in higher ed?
That's a really fantastic question. It's a really difficult question on a lot of levels too. I guess that's really the crux of the liberal arts is we do have so many people coming from different levels of life experience, different types of life experiences, different types of course experiences. And I think that's one of the big reasons that I feel open resources work particularly well with humanities, because when you look at just what is in one particular textbook, sometimes it can be difficult to create a course that breeds that level of differentiation when you're only using, you have a singularity in your material space, essentially. So what we're able to do through projects such as this is we're able to collect a variety of different things that will draw in students on multiple levels, because what works, of course we know this, what works for one student and what is relevant for one student will be completely irrelevant to 15 other students. So one of the strengths that I found with just open source education in general is that we're typically throwing a wider net around our material space. We're able to really look beyond just the core of that essential text and pull in all of these really sort of peripheral materials that can, I think, increase our effectiveness and that really pulling in students who would not necessarily ordinarily be united by one particular commonality or thread.
Yeah, interesting. Quite. I think this is a nice and interesting segue here because of jumping off of differentiating and what can be personalized, segueing into the idea of, well, what are the opportunities for interaction, maybe based on some of this analysis. I certainly know educators, a lot of Schoology people who use, maybe 100 different tools in the course. They're pulling in every kind of embeddable thing possible. They have very exciting things, but it could be that based on some of this analysis, especially survey form on people's comfort with technology, you might have an opportunity to dial the use of technology up or down. We're going to talk about our sort of Schoology toolbox in a little bit, but this analysis, I think, might be part of that as well. Anne, can you drill into that a little bit?
Can you restate that I'm sorry, you were beeping in and out.
Oh, sorry about that. In part of our analysis here, we had the idea for opportunities for interaction, the interaction between the instructor and the students between each other, students actually interacting with content. But some of that, I feel, might have to do with this feedback on students' availability, usage, or comfortability, how comfortable they are with that technology, and that it could impact some of these opportunities for interactions.
Yes, it absolutely can. And part of the national and international standards for online course design is ensuring that learners have multiple different ways and different opportunities to interact and give feedback, not only to the instructor, but to other students in the course and with the actual content. So that's where providing instructional materials in a number of different modalities becomes very, very important. So again, you have that learner choice, which is going to enhance engagement and really give them the best opportunity for mastery of that content.
Yeah, absolutely. Pretty. I think it's really nice to, even if you can't plan the whole thing out, to be thinking about those opportunities for interactions in those different spheres that you have instructor students, the students with each other, and the students with the content. And it's just a really nice framework to think about, that those are your sort of interaction constraints, if you will. Now, I think some of you might be thinking, who do a lot of project-based learning, interaction between students and community, students and anything outside of the classroom, that the unpredictables, the things like that, that could be a really interesting other part of that matrix.
I thought one of the challenges in actually designing this course using Schoology as the LMS was that I had so much choice. So Schoology gives you so many different tools and so many different modes to do it. So there's plenty of personalization in it.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes we've talked about, I think I talked about with both of you, that having restraints does sometimes unleash creativity, and having too many options can be almost oppressive because it's really hard to know where to start. Great. Well, we're getting closer to putting this thing together. Um, and we're going to do a little bit of that right now. We talked about that one of the first things, while we want to be cautious about creating the interactive and actual core course content, that one thing that can be done right away is what Anne and I were referring to as housekeeping, the kinds of things that would go in every single course that would be pretty standard, that you don't need to figure out how to reinvent the wheel every time. What are those things that are going in every course? And I think, Angie, you might be able to speak to this as well, as you followed a pretty strict template to put together your course as well. Angie, do you want to start talking about some of the constraints or the positive framework constraints that went into this, like accessibility? And then Anne, maybe you can talk about some of the templates that you put together at your school. And I don't think we have audio right now. 1 second. Go ahead, Angela. Let's see if you have. We may have just have lost audio right there. So let's just flip that the other way. And you talked a lot about templates that you put together, and that's largely what this this mind map is illustrating. Talk to me a little bit about that.
Yes, so as online learning becomes more prevalent and as funding could potentially be tied to online course development, we found it very helpful to create templates for all of our teachers. A consistent look across all courses within an organization is very important. You can personalize it and put your own unique flair on it, but there are a number of components that help meet compliance for online design. So what we start off with is we have every instructor pull over from Schoology resources a pre-made template of course resources. And they're allowed then to customize it, and we set it up so that it's very easy and intuitive for them to do so. But it does include things like our one-to-one agreement, our school district's internet agreement, the Schoology Code of Conduct, how to contact tech support, our accessibility statement, and directions as to how to get special services if they are needed. Of primary importance, of course, is the instructor information, and we have to pay attention to what that looks like both from the web view and from the app view as well, because as we know, some parents only access Schoology maybe from their phone, and so we want to make sure that we again offer that types of information in multiple different areas. Key information for parents is very important, and then customized instructor information about the course. The statement of purpose. What is the course? What's the purpose of the course? What are students going to know and do throughout the course? And then any other customized information. But again, teachers are able to go to a shared resource group and just pull those templates right in, which saves a lot of time.
Nice. We're seeing, as you might imagine, a lot of comments in chat saying, I would love to see your templates. Maybe we can loop back around at some point and and take a look at these. And you know, Anne, while you're there, as we talk about other things, if you want to bring up Schoology on your end, I can always share your screen as well from here.
Sure. Okay.
We want to look at those towards the end of the session.
Okay.
I got to say, as an instructional designer, I use templates all the time as well. if I create a really good looking page, a good design, or a good framework, I save it to my resources and then can reuse it. And if I'm working with a team, I'm using those group resources that allow you to distribute content like that. Okay, it's a great way to do it. All right, so moment here. Let's. I want to dig into Schoology at this time and look at some of those housekeeping things we could go ahead and apply. Angela, let's just see if we got any of your if we got your audio back, because it dropped for a minute there, I think. Maybe, maybe not. Okay. Going on, let's see. You should see, let's see, do you all see my Schoology screen up right now? Make sure my share is sharing the right thing.
Still seeing your mind map.
Oh, okay, 1 second. Okay, that better?
Mm-hmm.
Great. All right, so I just popped in. This is a mostly blank Schoology course. I have one folder that is sitting there as an example. When you look through, you should all see the the resources we're actually looking at here. So one thing that we can look at when we're first starting, before we even plan anything, are looking at the course resources and looking at things like objectives at the syllabus, readings, and handouts. Okay, as Anne mentioned, if there's an instructor guide, should pop that in. And here is some of the best stuff, is we have course outcomes and a course map. I think I already have this out. What I like about, before looking at any activities, I try to find in any open resource, what are the objectives, what are the for the course, and then what are module level objectives. Some people call these terminal objectives and these enabling objectives, depending on what kind of instructional design terminology you like throwing around. But what I like about this is that there can be a pause moment of, okay, well, what, this is great. Everything is well outlined. It even is using really specific taxonomy, really well-written learning objectives. But what I would do here is use this. This is my folder structure, basically, right? It's one of those housekeeping things that we can do before we have to worry about anything, is get the framework together. I find it much easier to build courses once you have a framework. You'll see many people requests all the time saying, I wish when I add materials, things would go to the top of the page instead of the bottom of the page. Common feature request. That request often comes up because people don't realize you can just hover your pointer right above a folder and add anything right there. So I'm going to add a new folder for module 1. I'm just copying and pasting everything in here. We said we would build some materials live, and that's what we're doing here. It's sort of like, I feel like the cooking show version of Schoology. Now, and one thing that I always do is with this stuff is I often don't want to bring over the formatting from the source.
Correct.
Tell me if this is also one of your favorite tricks. Select all, go to this little formatting option, and here at the bottom, clear formatting.
Correct.
That's just my best friend. Now, when you're reformatting things, bullets usually are the thing that sometimes get messed up. Going from between any platform to another platform. There we go. And so we just reapply those. Done. And I love folder colors for no reason. Easy to see. Okay, well, I'm good to go here. But what I might do, if students are already in this course, and this is a future module, I might go ahead and unpublish this, right? Unpublishing, that's the same thing as visibility, remember? So it depends when this course is being built. Is it being built all at once with no students in it, like as a template? Or am I actively teaching this and building as I go? And do you have any thoughts about building as you go versus building all at once?
I like to have the basic layout done, but I'm making modifications throughout, and I think that's the best approach to design. As you heed feedback from students, you know, the learners are the ones that are actually immersed in it, so they have the best type of feedback. Never ever expect to build a course ahead of time and not make changes.
Yeah,
That absolutely cannot happen. But I've done it both ways, but most of the time I just have a shell and then work from there, module by module.
Yeah.
There are some things that I do up front, however. Other housekeeping things like with my grading groups, all of those things I set up ahead of time.
So your grading groups you set up ahead of time. So let's say we have our modules being made. We talked about that we'd be differentiating things up often on scores. For those of you who are interested, I'm going to go ahead and be as open as possible, embrace openness here. Here's my course access code, if anyone wants to join as a student. And we would jump into our members area, and you see I don't have any students yet. But if grading groups are not a terribly familiar concept to you, this is where you create them. And grading groups allow you to organize your members. I already got Melissa Hughes. Big fan of Melissa Hughes. And I can name these anything that I want. Now, it's worth probably pausing here for a moment for those of you who are not familiar with grading groups. And you were telling me that one of the things you like about grading groups is that there can be overlap. They can be used for various reasons. So are there some grading groups that you'd be making up front as your prep work, and then others that you would be making possibly on the fly?
Absolutely, because I want to be able to differentiate and individually assign. So I would, the ones that I would make ahead of time would be those based on the student data, on the Lexile scores. So those would be the first ones, but I would also be using graded groups along the way for the various projects, because I want to, part of the goal of humanities is to immerse students in different opinions and different perspectives. So as many groups as I can actually get the kids in, I would want to do that to, again, get that interaction there student to student. So I would be making them throughout the course as well.
Great. And one of my favorite little grading group tips, I don't know if any of you have worked with our PD specialist at Schoology, Joe Vassallo. He keyed me into the idea of when you want to create just random grading groups for just teamwork to split things up, he just goes with 3 groups and goes down the columns. Group 1, Group 2, Group 3. Done. And I really like the efficiency of that. So here I have a few different grading groups. Easy enough to make. Sorry. Group 2 and Group 3. And one of the reasons why I really wanted to show all this live is that some people talk about differentiation. It sounds like a lot of, it could sound like a lot of work, but I've just put those together pretty quickly. Another really great thing about grading groups, for those of you who just need a little bit extra push here, is that these all filter for you. And also in your grade book, this is probably my absolute favorite thing, is that many people do not know that you get an extra filter in your grade book. And that really helps with differentiation, to just look at one group of students you're trying to target to elevate or to push forward in this scenario. And we'll look at assigning those things as well. We had a great question in chat that Kelly just sent me, and it's one of my favorite questions I get all the time. I'd be curious to hear what your thoughts are, Anne. While we're talking about building, people have noticed that I've talked a lot about templates. I've talked about I might just be building this course freestanding, but I'm building it in my courses instead of my resources. I am doing that on purpose. Do you have thoughts about that, Anne?
When I first started with Schoology, I did a lot of building and resources, and we had staff start off by doing that. I like to see what the course materials look like and how they operate from the student view frequently as I build. So what I tend to do is actually build in the course and then keep saving to resources along the way, and of course using resources as a backup. Now, tests and quizzes are a little bit different. I like to have those in question banks. I like to bring those in. Sometimes it's a little bit easier to personalize those. If you've got your regular mainstream learners, your modified, super modified, however you need to, whatever accommodations you need to make for special learners, sometimes that's easier to manage in resources, but overall I do design in the course itself.
Yeah, me too. So I also just find it really a very friendly environment. I like seeing all the folders together. I like being able to expand and move things.
Yes.
I am sort of obsessed with the sequence of materials, so I might be moving things around a little bit, and I like being able to drag and drop in my course. The other thing that is helpful to know is that when you look at the syllabus here, as most syllabuses do, there is a fair amount about grading and about point allocation, and that is easier to handle in the course as well. In your course, when you save to resources, there's a sense that Schoology is just saving the core materials without interactions, but it's also not saving gradebook information, or that's what it looks like. But actually, if you have grading categories and things like that set up, it will, behind the scenes, retain the grading categories. So when you're starting a new course shell, if you set up your gradebook first with the same categories, then import your resources, everything will remap to those categories. And so it's a really slick trick. We have, if you go to the Schoology YouTube channel, you'll see some micro lessons on that about restarting courses. And that also talks a little bit more in more detail about some of the technicalities of making moves between courses and resources.
And then, of course, utilizing bulk edit.
No, yeah, bulk edit is our best friend.
It's a gem.
Yeah. If there's always one thing, if I say people, if you have 10 minutes of PD at the end of the year, bulk edit. That's it. If you're not familiar with what that is, it's in the gradebook. It lets you see all of your materials and all their various details. It's over. Move some things around it. You'll find it. You'll find it over here. Okay, so let's jump forward to talk about actual course building. So we might have gone through and made all the shells here. We've talked a lot about differentiation. So that's a lot of that design process has already been thought about. And then a big bulk of this is activity content mapping, I call it. I call it activity pairing, toolbox mapping, if you will. What, and this is usually what people talk about with course building, is that the part that we're ending with here. So there we go. Let's go into look at module 1 here. Here are our activities. So this is the real lesson pieces. And Angela, let's see if I know that you dialed in on the phone since the voice over IP was a little fuzzy. Let's see if we have your audio. I see you with your phone there.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yeah, that is more clear. Thanks.
Oh, is it better? Okay, fantastic.
So you've heard us rattle on about some of these building things, and we're getting pretty deep into the weeds of Schoology specific stuff and how we handle resources and things like that. Now this gets into the the real rubber meets the road piece here. What and this is sometimes where people get stuck as well. How do I build this in Schoology? How do I do this in Schoology? What is my choice? So let's go through these. This is the first part of the module. There's some icebreaker discussions. There's some team challenges. And it sounds like, Angela, you are already taking a pretty creative approach to humanities, even when we look at some of these face-to-face challenges, setting up interviews. You'll see the students get divided into tribes and things like that. What is instructionally, besides just the content being taught instructionally, what is your goal with some of these more creative ideas?
Well, that's a great question. First of all, I have a couple of goals. Number one, to not be bored. I feel like as an educator, if you're ever bored in this profession, you're doing something wrong, and you pretty much need to burn it down and start all over again. And certainly we have the luxury of doing that, either every quarter or every term, depending on how it's sort of sequenced. So there's tremendous potential to try new things. Try. If it doesn't work, my goodness, try something else. So being a humanities and philosophy-based person, I'm extremely interested in human connections, the connections that students can make. And certainly, it's a bit of a different animal if you're doing this in a face-to-face classroom versus doing something online. I mean, we all know that that requires some degree of thinking around corners. But what I have noticed is that when we are able to group, and spoke to this earlier, being able to group students, it really does something. And so tribes are something that I just started doing a few years ago, and I've had a lot of great experiences doing this, because something changes when you modify the terminology. Students are used to hearing the word group, they're used to hearing the word team, but tribe elicits something else to them. There's some sort of primal element that you're tying into, and it's intentional by design. I have done things where I've asked the tribes to come up with a name for themselves, some sort of identifying moniker that I can then put in the grade book. Anything that you can do when you're working with groups or subdividing into groups that helps form a sense of group cohesion. So when I've used this tribal approach, part of the strategy is to create a sense of accountability within the groups. Hey, look, this is your family. These are your people for the next 8 or 10 weeks, or however long the term happens to be. So if you notice that somebody wasn't active in a discussion board this week, you notice that somebody doesn't seem to be really engaging as much, if this is your person, reach out, send an email, send a text, chat with that person, try to pull them back in, because certainly that's our job as instructors and facilitators, is to try to bring everybody on board and keep them on board to the end. But I have found that if we sort of recruit our students to do this as well in a relatively strategic way, that it can be quite effective. Now, obviously, it doesn't solve everything, but that's part of it. So any activity that I come up with, actually, I was just telling my ground campus students yesterday, I've got a box of puppets and I'm not afraid to use it. I have asked students to make raps about the Middle Ages. Sometimes I'll just give them a very quick turnaround time. You have an hour, here's 5 people to research, turn it into a PowerPoint and go. But everything that I do is really designed to move them out of their comfort zone. I think a lot of times what happens in instruction is students are used to the same routine, and it's true in on-campus and online classes. They get it. It's dialed in for them. They understand how the game is played, and while that's not necessarily bad, I think in order to get to that higher level of critical thought, we've got to nudge them a bit. We've got to make them a little uncomfortable, and just that's really how we get to those creative breakthroughs. There's new ways of engaging with our content and engaging across different disciplines. So that's really that was really the goal behind the activities that I nested into this particular course. And it's always evolving. It's always growing. The beautiful thing about something like this, if you don't like it or if you don't think it will work for your particular group of students, my gosh, try something else. Because the same thing doesn't work from term to term, and it doesn't work from group to group, because certainly, as we all know, the energy changes every time you have new students, and we have to be really adaptive in how we approach it, and use our experiences and our opportunities really as launch pads into future initiatives. But always try something. Don't ever be afraid to try something that you've never tried before, because it may just be the most brilliant activity you've ever thought of.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes those biggest risks are have the biggest rewards.
Absolutely.
So if putting this into action here, this was originally conceived as a face-to-face activity. For the sake of argument, let's think of it as an online or distance activity, or even using the LMS to simply supplement or to provide a repository for the things happening in the activity. So one thing that I'm thinking of, and I want to hear how you would approach this, but I would, as I was going through this, probably the first thing I would do, especially if my planning was in Google, which often it might be, I would use this comment feature heavily and write up all sorts of ideas here. And I do that planning. Anne mentioned planning things on paper as well. I am a huge believer in paper for the planning process, or sticky notes, index cards, find a blank wall and just start putting things up. And that sometimes online technology implementation works so much better when you have still embraced paper for the planning. Love paper. Don't have to throw it out. So let's say that this is a discussion, sorry, excuse me, a discussion board. But, we have this challenge here that this activity is supposed to be by group. So if I put this discussion board out here, it's going to get very messy with all these different tribes responding and using this possibly as a thinking space, as a collaborative workspace as they work out ideas, as a scratch pad. Or if this was fully distance, this might be the real deal. This might be it. So Anne, let's circle back to a previous idea. What are we doing here to make this work with tribes?
Well, personally, I liked the idea of using a media album, because I thought that would be just a great way to collect the creative thoughts and ideas that everyone had. So again, it could be poetry, it could be music, it could be dance videos, but how fun to create a culture and be able to pull from multiple different types of media and give that overall picture. And just combine everyone's ideas all in one place. So that would be the tool that I would probably use.
Great. So I'm going to jump a step further and say, well, what if we combine my idea and your idea here? Maybe we do some initial brainstorming in a discussion board that is individually assigned to the group. Okay. So this allows me to project manage this a little bit. If this was for homework, setting a due date, there we go. Now, if I have 3 different tribes, I'm going to want 3 different discussion boards, and there isn't really an option here to just duplicate this in place. So as we talk about templates, if I wanted to make 3, 5, 10 different tribe discussions, each assigned to a different group, so those students would only see their own discussion board, so it could be nice and private and tribally insular. I would probably go through, let me do this a little slower, hit that gear icon, save to resources, and that's going to give me a template. I often actually like having a collection or something in here for templates. And then the fastest way to get this done is add another material, but instead of creating something from scratch, importing from resources. And there's my tribes copy. There we go. And I would just keep doing that until I had all the ones that I needed. And what I would then do is just jump into each one. And the one thing that I need to change for each is the grading group. So group 2, and by the way, students don't see the names of those groups. That can be helpful to know. In group 3. And then I would follow that by adding 1 media album. So you have a lot of individualized group work, and then a media album where the group can actually, once they've decided what they're doing, collect and share all of their responses. And by default, this little, it's hard to say what that icon is, but this icon, by default, this button is on, meaning instructors and students can add media to the album and also comment on the albums. So that, I think, is going to allow everyone, and X out of this because I don't have anything to add yet. This allows everyone to do their work on that group level, but then share things as an entire class. Of course, if this was fully distance learning, I might do something like add student completion rules, which forces students to go through one activity before hitting the next. Or I might simply have a requirement that everyone views the final media album just so I can see that everyone is engaging in the course. So that you have some more advanced options. At this point, I wanted to bring up completion rules right now in a way to tell you what not to do. I always, if I'm ever going to sequence anything with hard completion rules, I always do it as the absolute last step. I like adding completion rules at the end because it can be very easy to forget that you added some completion rules, then you moved some things around, you took some things out, and you could get some unintended results. So I always add completion rules as the last step. I actually, even if I want to do it now until I'm ready to release this module. So we, and that's the idea, is going through each one and finding finding its pairing. So for instance, the weekly reflection we're getting close to the end of our time here, but the weekly reflection, there are a number of ways we could do this. And Angela, we talked a lot about what this was for, and there's a weekly reflection in each module. It's a nice sort of soft assessment to make sure students are reflecting on everything. We're not checking for hard grammar and MLA and all of that. We're just, the point is continuous writing and reflection. Anne, would you be using a discussion or an assignment with this? Would you maybe be using a portfolio?
Actually, my approach is a little bit different for reflection. I feel like in order to give students the freedom to fully capitalize on their creativity, I like to make reflective journals private. And so what I do is I actually create a discussion thread and individually assign it ahead of time to each student. That's one of those housekeeping things I do up front. And I feel like even though you're always trying to reduce the transactional distance or, you know, in that online environment, in the reflection piece, I feel like it's important for students to be able to feel like confident that they can be open, their ideas can be unjudged, and as an instructor, I like to be able to give personalized feedback without sharing it with everyone. So I do create a discussion for each and every student, and again, those are only seen by me and the individual student.
Cool. So you would have like 30, if I'm understanding this right, you might have somewhere in here. Do you think outside of the modules you would have a separate reflections folder and just have 30 discussion boards assigned to each student?
Yes, I do. I put them all in a folder, but they are outside of the modules. And again, that's communication between teacher and student, but I also, always as a standard, one of those housekeeping things is I create a water cooler discussion, which is open to everyone. So I think it's important that, yes, students can use messaging and so forth, but not everybody can see everybody's messaging and chats. So I like to have a water cooler discussion where students can help each other and reflect on each other's ideas, and just that ongoing discussion thread throughout the course. And I usually put that right under course resources.
Interesting. Yeah, that makes sense. Would you also, so you have the conversations about the content, like weekly reflections, some collaborative pieces. For just open-ended questions, would you reserve or specify to students in the syllabus or in the sort of introduction exactly what the updates area should be for? Because that, some people use that as almost a water cooler area. It obviously depends if students are allowed to post here or not.
I would lay that out in my course instructions, and I would actually go through that. I would ensure that I do a course orientation that would include those parameters and specifics about where certain things should be posted in and so forth.
Cool. That leads to one of my housekeeping things that we haven't talked about, which is worth mentioning, that I'd go up to course options here and go into course settings as the first thing I do with any new course, and actually make sure that these are what I intend them to be. For instance, can students comment on updates? Because that completely changes the vibe of the course. Great. So what I'd like to do, because we usually just go an hour with a LEAP webinar, and we're already a few minutes over, what we're going to be doing at 4 is Anne and I are going to just continue building on this course, right where we left off. So if you're really interested to see what happens next, come back at 4. We'll actually be recording both sessions so you can check them out. And then this is my pet project here, so I'm going to just keep building this. You have the access code, and we'll eventually be posting it so anyone can use this course, as it is open courseware. It is important, Angie and might have some ideas on this as well. in education, especially K-12 education, people are terribly confused about the idea of copyrights, of what is copyright and what is not, the difference between something that is just a photocopy that might be owned by an actual publisher, versus actual open courseware, something that is actually licensed under the Creative Commons. I think it's just as a final point here to wrap up with, if you had any advice or reflections just to clarify what open courseware is for those who are going to go out, leave this webinar and start looking for free materials. As we're getting that answer, Kelly, if you want to queue up any last questions.
Thanks. So that's absolutely an important point. Certainly, if anything is Creative Commons licensed, you are golden. That's really sort of the holy grail of open courseware. But really, it depends on the individual items as well, because there are a lot of items that you might be able to use in a nonprofit sort of way. For instance, for traditional classroom use, that you wouldn't necessarily be able to use in a corporate meeting or something like that. So you really have to look, unless you're pulling from a specific repository that has been sort of branded open, you're really going to have to look at individual items. And since we are in the academic world, we do typically tend to get the better end of the stick there. But my biggest advice is to make friends with your library team. Our librarians have been absolutely invaluable resources. With the open source project here, we had a head librarian who absolutely was incredible at going through and pulling copyright information and reaching out to get permissions for things that had sort of sticky copyright, scenarios. And what we couldn't find, we made ourselves, and we put our own Creative Commons attribution on it. And sometimes you do have to just create your own resources. But the library staff is definitely your go-to. Even now at Colorado Tech, I've worked with my library team to build open source guides for a number of our classes, and we're going to be talking about these. If anybody's going to the e-learning conference in Florida next week, I'll be there presenting, so stop on by. But all of that goes back to having a good team of librarians who know copyright inside and out, and are really there to help instructors not get into trouble, and to really help us find our best resources. So this is a collaborative effort. It's not something that any one of us can do completely on our own. So I would say that having those connections built in at whatever institution you're a part of would be a great resource.
That's a very great final point. And you will often hear in Schoology implementation that the librarians are the ones who can be the bridge also in general between the classroom and technology. So they're just invaluable resources. Would you say the same, Anne?
Oh, absolutely. And I do have to put a little plug in for Angela, because I do Quality Matters course reviews. This is probably one of the best I've ever seen in terms of documentation for copyright, citing all included works. Just phenomenal.
Great.
Thank you. I really appreciate that.
Well, thank you all so much for joining us, and thank you for being patient while we worked out a couple of technical difficulties in the beginning. And 4 o'clock, instead of doing a total repeat of this, we're going to literally pick up where we stopped and continue building that course out. Angela, thank you so much for making time for us this morning to give us background and your expertise. And thank you so much, and I'll see you again at 4 o'clock.
All right.
Thanks,
everyone.
Everyone.